Hello, good afternoon, everybody. This is Sarathy from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. I would like to respond to some of the questions that were raised after our Sustainability All or Nothing seminar held by the Students for Sustainability group at KAUST. So I have several questions that were asked on the Facebook Live channel, and I received those by email because we didn't have enough time to answer those questions immediately after the live seminar. So I just want to take a few minutes today to give some of the answers to these very nice questions, and actually ones that made me think a lot and perhaps help maybe even raise more questions in our minds or spur further discussion amongst your students at KAUST and as well as the community. The first question is from Julian. It says, if you are familiar with the term poverty trap from last year's economic Nobel Prize winners, do you think we as a planet are in a sustainability trap? Would the strategies already tested for nutrition, education, etc. work to get us out of it? So the poverty trap states that poor people, they already are quite poor and they have a very low level of capital per person. And then each subsequent generation of poor people tend to be trapped in poverty because the ratio of capital per person actually decreases from generation to generation. And this is because the population grows faster than the capital that is being accumulated in that poor community or the family that's in poverty. So many people in economics used to think a better way to actually get rid of poverty was just to invest more into capital. And as we talked in the sustainability seminar, capital is things like human capital, cities, infrastructure, buildings, but also health, education, infrastructure, public institutions, but also natural capital, things like biodiversity, ecosystems. So the conventional thinking was you invest more in these things, pour more money into it, and people will come out of poverty. But the problem is, and what the individuals that won the Nobel Prize discovered was that they did several experiments around the concepts of how you deal with poverty, and they found some things that were quite surprising. For example, rather than just giving poor people food to eat, they found that if you give people just money for food, what they do is they tend to spend that money on food that they like to eat rather than on food that's more nutritious. So poor people tend to be suffering from malnutrition. So in order to actually improve their health, they should actually spend the money on more nutritious foods. But the nature of human nature is such that you give an individual money, just like you or I, they would first spend that money on sweets or more savory foods that they like to eat and enjoy to eat rather than more nutritious foods. The same was for education. We would conventionally think if you want to get people out of poverty to be more well educated is you just build more schools or give them free textbooks. But doing these things is not certainly very effective. And the experiments that the Nobel Prize winners conducted actually showed that just providing textbooks to poor people is not enough to increase their knowledge. You need to also do testing. You need to see where they need to learn, what topics or what fields they need to become more knowledgeable in, and then direct the resources in those areas. So probably the question says, should we do the same thing with sustainability? Probably. I think that's a good point. Right now, many things related to sustainability, many investments are around conventional thinking. Preserve a space, preserve this part of nature, invest in technologies to reduce emissions. But all of this may just be putting us in a trap, a so-called sustainability trap. And we would need to do different kinds of experiments to see really how to come out of the sustainability trap. I would think what the question raises is, should we, rather than again providing money to clean up neighborhoods or providing money to individuals, distributing wealth to individuals, maybe we just have to do a better job at coming up with more sustainable solutions in the market, then support those solutions so people can choose from them. And this is a problem we have many different types of technologies, many different types of sustainable options and unsustainable options, but humans are not really motivated to adopt the ones that are really the most sustainable. So we need to do many types of experiments, deploying products, technologies, policies and then see which ones actually work. And right now, again, you can say that this is not being done at a very large scale, and it needs to be done if we're to come out of this trap. So very good question, Julian. Thank you. The second question is from Maxime. Maxime asks, is pricing nature, such as a monetization of the natural environment, endangered species, etc., also known as banking nature, a workable solution? So in our seminar, we talked about this methodology of pricing in nature, or pricing the externalities of any product, service, development, not only costing in the service it provides or the value or utilitarian value it provides to people, but also pricing in the externalities associated with that development, product, or service. So you ask, Maxime asks, is it a workable solution? It is definitely a very challenging thing to do, because we often don't know what price many of the things that we do actually impart on the environment and how to monetize those. And that's why we say that if we are to achieve this solution, it's not just a matter of economists and people familiar with economic and financial markets determining prices, but we need real experts in terms of science, understanding how technologies, developments, services influences the environment, what are the negative impacts on the environment, what are the positive impacts on the environment. And then we need also engineers, people who understand technology very well and the entire supply chain to cost the individual impact of each process associated with development of a technology and the externalities, external costs it has on the environment. So is it a workable solution? I think it is workable, but of course it's going to be very challenging, because we don't have, of course, this expertise, individuals or individual agencies that are able to do this. So you need basically a very broad coalition of expertise to achieve this type of banking nature, understanding both the human technology, human capital, and natural capital. And the second question that Maxime asks is there any embedding model for Earth carrying capacity or limits to growth? Now, carrying capacity is an interesting concept. It's been around for maybe 100 or so years, 150 years, and it basically tries to identify if you have any activity, maybe even human activity, can the Earth, how much of the human population can the Earth carry? The same is true for many other things. They sometimes ask for carrying capacity for fish in a marine environment, or carrying capacity for live game or livestock management in terms of farming. So carrying capacity is kind of a term used to determine, again, what is the ability for an environment or system to sustain a population, organisms, or a certain human activity. Now, as a modeling framework, I don't find it to be very rigorous, carrying capacity, because many people do carrying capacity calculations, and there's a large number of assumptions used in these calculations for carrying capacity. In addition, sometimes carrying capacity depends on, again, which environmental system you are looking at. If it's very narrow, then carrying capacity could be quite limited. If you're looking at a global scale, it's really challenging to understand carrying capacity. So I think it's important to understand carrying capacity, to investigate it. There's a lot of literature about it. I encourage you to read about it. But as a methodological framework for determining how sustainable we can be, I think it's challenging, because it doesn't have a fixed methodological framework in which it works. Whereas other things I mentioned, at least the so-called banking nature, or determining externality costs, life cycle assessment, sustainability assessment, these things tend to be more structured in their framework, and at least allows for all assumptions, all estimations to be well documented, so that you can make a more informed decision about policy making related to sustainability. The next question is from Abdullah. Abdullah asks, for effective implementation of sustainability, should policymakers or governments make sustainable pathways the cheapest option for consumers? This is also a very good question, is how do we get consumers to adopt sustainable solutions. One way is for governments to provide subsidies, provide incentives, but I think these are typical economic methods to again, for any type of new service or product which the government wants to support. Either sometimes they don't want to import technologies or import products, so they want to encourage local businesses, local product development. They'll provide incentives. Same can be done for sustainable solutions. But again, my my caution in this type of thinking is a solution that the government supporting really the most sustainable one. And so again, we need a framework to ensure that when we do these types of incentives to lower costs for certain sustainable pathways, we really should make sure that they are the most sustainable option. And as we talked about in the seminar, we talk about this framework of life cycle assessment. Individuals and of course governments need to understand in the context of their economy, social, and environmental framework, what are the most sustainable options? And for that, they need proper methodologies to understand that. In addition, maybe a better way is rather than just making subsidies or incentives to support sustainable pathways and make them the cheapest option. I think again, if we properly price in the negative externalities of unsustainable pathways, then those will naturally make those more expensive. So another way is rather than subsidizing so-called technologies which are believed to be sustainable and making them cheaper, just better determine the cost of all pathways, and indeed the most, if that costing is done ensuring that negative externalities to society, to economy, to environment are actually accounted for, then indeed the ones that are the most sustainable will be the cheapest option for the consumers. The next question is from Iman. Iman asks, how do I see the world in 20 years? More localization? This is a very difficult question. I cannot predict what the world will be in 20 years. But for like anybody, my prediction is based on past experience. So I think the next 20 years may not be that much different than the last 20 years. And from the year 2000 to year 2020, the world, of course, changed a lot. Many events happened. But on the whole, you can say the trajectory of human progress and you can say the growth in globalization, digitalization, technology, investment, and growth just carried on as we expected, as has been going on for the last 150 years. So unless there's some huge change in human psychology, human behavior, the way governments deal with environment, economic, and social aspects of sustainability, maybe the next 20 years may not be that much different than the last 20 years. But this is not to be pessimistic. I think there will be, of course, progress in many things. We will aim to achieve technologies or solutions for climate change, but probably most of this will be from a technological standpoint and not so much on a social standpoint, and maybe not so much on a reduction of actual consumption and preservation of the environment standpoint. So I think, again, there has to be some major changes in the way humans behave, the way we interact with the environment to achieve true sustainability. Otherwise, we're just going to carry on the same way, introduce new technologies, new solutions, which are more sustainable in some ways, maybe in terms of climate mitigation, greenhouse gas emissions, but it indeed will have environmental impacts in other ways. And again, this is the nature of human activities. We tend to find the best solution for the foreseeable future, but at the same time, we need to think very long term and what is truly sustainable thinking. Global population, distribution of wealth, and distribution of resources evenly across all people, as well as personal choices in consumption and ways of living. And again, these are things that will take generations to fix. Finally, we have 3 questions from Phil. Phil asks, To what extent do you think industrial society can be reformed, or is the technological system incompatible with sustainability? It's a good question. Similar to my answer for Iman, I think, industrial society, technological system can be reformed to some extent. It may become more sustainable, but can it be truly sustainable? Probably not, because again, whenever some new technology or new solution comes out, it may just shift the burden on the environment or the social structure in a different way. And by just shifting to another resource or shifting to another waste, indeed, we do not achieve true sustainability. So we should not think about just technology or modifications or improvement to industrial society and changes in the way we deal with human capital as the solution. Indeed, we have to think about transforming the society maybe back away from industrial society, too much technological development, too much dependence on resources from the environment, too much discharging of waste, which are built into the industrial society. So yeah, I think again, for true sustainability, we need to think more than just industry and technology. We need to think about, again, the number of people, the demands or the wants of these people, and providing more towards their needs. So the second question is, Phil asks, is how might we shrink the bottomless bucket of wants at KAUST? This is not a question one can ask just for KAUST. It's applicable to any place. It's applicable to any individual. So our nature is to want unlimited satisfactions, and then this is the way our brain is wired. This is our human nature. So the only way to change it is to change the individual, and to change the individual to not want so many things, to not crave for filling this bottomless bucket. You need to train people to be content with what's available and content with what they have. And contentment is not something that's achieved by filling the bucket. Contentment is a way of thinking, is how people feel inside, given their own self-worth, their own satisfaction. And contentment doesn't come from goods and services. Contentment comes from the way you think about yourself, your own physical well-being, and your connections with other people. And if we move away from, goods, services, industrial products, providing and fulfilling our desires, to things that are actually leading to more contentment, like social relationships, good health, well-being, then we'll definitely move away from filling this bottomless bucket with material things and filling it with things that actually make us happy, which are not material in sense, but mainly psychological, and therefore have much less impact on the environment. And finally, Phil asks a very good question. How does the definition of need change with time? Would internet be considered a need in the present? Again, a very good question. No longer can we say needs are just food, water, and shelter, but new things bring needs. And I think in today's society, maybe the internet is a need because it brings us social connections, family connections, it brings us communication, which are important. We say social connection is important, it's a need for a human being. And I think in this sense, maybe today internet is a need. But again, let's be realistic. We could live without internet. We could still maintain communication. We could still have connections with people without the internet. So again, internet has a lot of benefits. It provides a lot of good services for individuals, including healthcare, education, social connection. But at the same time, there's a lot of useless things on the internet. So again, if we focus on using this technology to fulfill certain needs, things that are important for our well-being, internet is good. Internet is a need that we should maintain. But again, this should not be overutilized for many of the superfluous wants that we want to fulfill our own desires.